Saturday, March 22, 2025, the message of the Gita. We have completed the 3 sessions of introduction. We will now take up the introduction. Actually, this introduction in the original essays on the Gita figures as the first chapter. The first chapter of the essays on the Gita, based on which this book is compiled. Its title is Our Need and Demand from the Gita. Why should we study the Gita when already there were so many other great treasure houses of Vedantic knowledge like the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, the Puranas, etc. Another text which came into existence 1,000 years later, what is its justification? Why one more? तो उसको उन्होंने एक स्पेशल चैप्टर, जो पहला चैप्टर है उसका नाम ही यही है, आवर नीड एंड डिमांड फ्रॉम द गीता. So this introduction is based on that. So what we will do is, since we have 2 consecutive sessions today and tomorrow, without studying the whole introduction, we'll pick out relevant portions and concentrate on those. So please come to introduction. It may be useful in approaching an ancient scripture such as the Veda, Upanishads or Gita. These 3 texts are, I have mentioned earlier, they are like a 3-legged stool, and it is the Vedantic philosophy rests on these 3 primary texts. The Upanishads, that is why it is called Vedant, because the Upanishads figure at the end of the Vedas. Then there are the Brahma Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. It may be useful in approaching an ancient scripture such as the Veda, Upanishads or Gita to indicate precisely the spirit in which we approach it. I mean, what should be our inner attitude towards the Gita? And I have mentioned it earlier. We can approach the Gita from 4 different angles. The first is that it is an episode. It is part of an epic. It's an episode of the Mahabharata. That is the first. The second is it is a primary text of the Vedantic philosophy. The third is that it is a handy guidebook for the practice of yoga. It's a practical guide. And the fourth perspective is you can treat it as a living presence with whom you can have a relationship. And I had given the example of in the Sikh religion, you have the relationship of the Sikhs with the Guru Granth Sahib. They fan it, they say Guru Granth Sahib aap so rahe hain, things like that. And even in Islam, often when they refer to the Quran, how do they refer to it? Quran Sharif. So, in other words, there is this tendency in all religions to regard their sacred text as not merely a text but as a living entity, a power, a Devi, a mother with whom you can have individual relationship. For instance, you can pray to the Gita that I want to understand you, please help me. You can pray to the Gita, and the Gita will rearrange the circumstances of your life so that it becomes accessible to you. It's a fact of experience. Approach it, and what exactly we think we may derive from it that is of value to humanity and its future. First of all, there is undoubtedly a truth, one and eternal, which we are seeking, from which all other truth derives, by the light of which all other truth finds its right place, explanation, and relation to the scheme of knowledge. It is my personal view also that the Vedantic philosophy is the greatest philosophy, and it should have overriding precedence over all other religions and philosophies. And if I support the Vedantic philosophy, it's not because I happen to be born in the Hindu religion, but based on what its message is. So, in other words, in a way, you can say the statement of the Vedantic philosophy is so integral, so comprehensive that this statement makes sense. All others derive from it. It is just like a glacier on a mountain peak, which from which several rivers flow, not just the Ganges but many others. All rivers flow from that central peak. That is the relation between the Hindu Dharam, Hindu religion based on the Vedantic philosophy and other religions. They are, you can say, derivatives. First of all, there is undoubtedly a truth, one and eternal, which we are seeking. Is it clear now? From which all other truth derives, by the light of which all other truth finds its right place, explanation, and relation to the scheme of knowledge. Is it clear? But precisely for that reason, it cannot be shut up in a single trenchant. Trenchant means which has a sharp cutting edge. Philosophy or scripture, in any single philosophy or scripture, are uttered altogether forever by any one teacher, thinker, prophet, or avatar. In other, sorry, this, but precisely for it cannot be shut up in a single train. It is not likely to be found in its entirety or in all its bearings in any single philosophy or scripture or uttered altogether forever by any one teacher, thinker, prophet, or in simple words, the Vedantic philosophy cannot be contained in one single statement. In English, there is a word called eclectic. 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 It's an adjective. It means very liberal. And because it is liberal, it is flexible. It is not rigid. So this is the merit of the Vedantic philosophy, that it is very comprehensive and very all inclusive, but at the same time flexible and what also we call in English resilient, that is capable of bending and being flexed. The other important, so this is one thing. Then we come down a little. You have secondly this truth. Found it? Everybody? Secondly, this truth, though it is one and eternal, expresses itself in time and through the mind of man. Therefore, every scripture must necessarily contain two elements, one temporary, perishable, belonging to the ideas of the period and country in which it was produced, the other eternal and imperishable and applicable in all ages and countries. In other words, each scripture has two parts. You are familiar with the term chaff and grain. It is the in agriculture this is called the process of winnowing. वो एक ऐसे होता है उसको जब गेहूं को फसल को काट के ऐसे उछालते हैं, तो क्या होता है वो हवा में जो चैफ है जो मतलब हस्क है वो हवा से उड़ जाता है और जो एक्चुअल ग्रेन है वो नीचे गिर जाता है. So in other words, the idea of referring to this comparison is that in every scripture there is the grain and there is the chaff. The chaff is the, or rather, the grain is the eternal truth. But that eternal truth has to be expressed based on the local, on the transitory circumstances in which that truth is given. In other words, for instance, गीता की जो एक तो सेंट्रल ट्रूथ है, एक है रिलेटेड टू दैट टाइम एंड दोज सर्कमस्टेंसेस. फॉर इंस्टेंस यू कैन नॉट साइट गीता अगर पढ़ो तो उसमें देर आर सर्टन रेफरेंसेस वेयर it gives the impression that the Gita supports the caste system, but it does not. There are others where it does not. So, in other words, we have to use our discriminating intelligence to be able to separate what is eternal and what is of transient value. For instance, even in the Ramayana, Lord Ram is the Maryada Purushottam. But as per today's value system, we will not endorse all that he did. I mean, his treatment of Sita. We will not support that today. But the essence of the Ramayana is that a man should be by nature of a pleasing nature. Ramate iti Rama. Rama means one who is pleasant, who doesn't have rough edges. I mean, he is accessible. He is not a person whom you will hesitate to approach. He is charming. Ramate it is a charming person. So that loss of ego, he is not arrogant. These are eternal qualities. But what he did कि वो धोबी के कहने पे सीता को भेज दिया जंगल में, वो that we will not support in today's time. Am I clear? We should have the discriminating intelligence of separating the chaff from the grain. Secondly, this truth, though it is one and eternal, expresses itself in time and through the mind of man. Therefore, in other words, every statement of that eternal truth in different ages will have a different formulation. It will bend itself it will be plastic and bend itself with the circumstances of that age. Therefore, every scripture must necessarily contain two elements, one temporary, perishable, belonging to the ideas of the period and country in which it was produced, the other eternal and imperishable and applicable in all ages and countries. So, one is the Sanatan element, the other is the transient element. Moreover, in the statement of the truth, the actual form given to it, the system and arrangement, the metaphysical mold, etc., must be largely subject to the mutations of time. उस वक़्त क्या circumstances होते हैं उस पे वो modify हो जाएगा and cease to have the same force, for the human intellect modifies itself always, continually dividing and putting together, it is obliged to shift, etc. Then we come a little more down. You have from the middle of that sentence, We can never be quite sure. Found it? We can never be quite sure of understanding an ancient book of this kind precisely in the sense and spirit it bore to its contemporary. मतलब उस वक़्त गीता लोग कैसे समझते थे, वो हम उसका एग्ज़ैक्ट अंदाज़ा आज नहीं लगा सकते। हम अपनी तरह से समझेंगे, वो अपनी तरह से but see, this is the important part. But what is of entirely permanent value is that which, besides being universal, has been experienced, lived, and seen with a higher than the intellectual vision. In other words, what is one is the eternal truth, and the other is that aspect of that eternal truth which has been experienced by great yogis and people throughout the ages who have felt that they have attained identity with Lord Krishna, and from that consciousness they are leading their daily lives. This is the important thing. We hold it therefore of small importance to extract from the Gita its exact metaphysical connotation. Connotation is suggestion, not actual statement, connotation, as it was understood by the men of the time, even if that were accurately possible, etc. And this is an interesting sentence. There is the divergence of the original commentaries which have been and are still being written upon it. All the different commentaries on the Gita agree on disagree. See, for they all agree in each disagreeing with all the others. And then come a little down, thoda side. But what we can do with profit, found it? But what we can do with profit is to seek for the actual living truths it contains, apart from their metaphysical form, to extract from it what can help us or the world. This is the point. That we have to see what benefit we can derive from the Gita in our personal lives. This is what I told you, that one of the relationships you can have with the Gita is like a devotee for a deity, like a child for a mother, total reliance, total submission. And as I told you, the example is very simple. Supposing somebody wants to understand the Gita, it happens with me, people come and tell me हमने गीता बहुत बार पढ़ी है पर कुछ समझ नहीं आता, वो 18 चैप्टर्स हैं और we get confused and all 700 श्लोकास. So then I tell them that why are you telling this thing to me? Tell it to the Gita. यही बात कि हम आज तुमको समझना चाहते हैं पर समझ में नहीं आता, तो हेल्प अस एंड यू विल सी कुछ ना कुछ ऐसा हो जाएगा कि यू विल फाइंड एन some means to understand it. So either you will come across a book or a pamphlet or a commentary or some person or some institution where there are regular discourses on the Gita, something will happen. Often people say हमें टाइम नहीं मिलता गीता समझने के लिए, हमें टाइम नहीं मिलता, हम तड़प रहे हैं समझने के लिए पर टाइम नहीं मिलता. उसका भी इलाज वही है कि यही बात गीता को कहो कि हमें टाइम नहीं मिल रहा, हमें टाइम दिलवाओ एंड यू विल सी circumstances will change and you will get the time if your prayer is sincere. But what we can do with profit is to seek in the Gita for the actual living truths it contains, apart from their metaphysical form, to extract from it what can help us or the world at large, and to put it in the most natural and vital form and expression we can find that will be suitable to the mentality and helpful to the spiritual needs of our present day humanity. No doubt, in this attempt, we may mix a good deal of error, born of our own individuality and of the ideas in which we live. This also I have experienced personally. Each one has his own temperament, and when they understand the Gita, they understand it the way they are constituted. कुछ लोग हैं उनको निचले बैठना बड़ा मुश्किल लगता है. They find it very difficult to sit still and not do anything and just sort of be in wrong. When they will study the Gita, they will always feel that the Gita supports action, activity. Yeah, you should always be engaged in activity. Gita supports that. People who are by nature quiet and meditative, they will say, they will quote those passages of the Gita which supports their point of view. So, in other words, even our understanding of the Gita is subjective. As did great, we may mix in our own individuality and of the ideas in which we live as did greater men before us. But see, but if we steep ourselves in the spirit of this great scripture, and above all, if we have tried to live in that spirit, we may be sure of finding it in as much real truth as we are capable of receiving, as well as the spiritual influence and actual help that personally we were intended to derive from. In other words, you can have an individual relationship, an equation with the Gita, and to the extent you are capable of absorbing the teaching of the Gita, that boon will be given to you. You will absorb it. And that is, after all, what scriptures were written to give. The rest is academical disputation or theological dogma. Only those scriptures, religions, philosophies, which can be thus constantly renewed, in other words, which are flexible, which are not rigid, not fossilized. Religion can be thus constantly renewed, relived, their stuff of permanent truth constantly reshaped and developed in the inner thought and spiritual experience of a developing humanity continue to be of living importance to mankind. That is why you will see many of those ancient religions have now sort of not, they are not as relevant, but Gita continues to be relevant throughout the ages. It has not outgrown its utility. The rest remain as monuments of the past but have no actual force or vital impulse for the future. Now, what Sri Aurobindo says is that in the Hindu tradition, there are different schools of thought. The Gita embraces all of them but then goes beyond them. It doesn't stop there. The thought of the Gita, monism. Monism is, if you study sociology and anthropology, religion also has evolved with time. Initially, there was pan-animism. Pan-animism was people believed that spirits inhabit trees, rivers, etc. So pan-animism gave, from pan-animism, those primitive people, they even worship trees, they worship Nagdev, etc. Then from pan-animism, as mankind evolved, we got pantheism. That is to say, God, there are many gods. There are many gods, and they pervade all over. Then you have pantheism. Then you have monotheism. that there is one God, which is basically the foundation of the Vedanta also. And then you have the next is monism. In monism, they believe that the highest supreme reality is not even a person, it is a principle, it is pure consciousness. वो आपने सुना होगा वो शंकराचार्य जी का है कि आई एम नाइदर दिस नॉर दैट न धातु न माता न पितृ न पौत्र चिदानंद रूपो शिवो हम शिवो that is the it is I think Nirvan Shatakam or something like that. So that so monism denies everything else except the existence of one supreme reality which is Brahman and which is featureless. That is monism. So this is what he is referring to. Gita is not pure. Then you have Vishishtadvait, which is the philosophy of um, Ramanujacharya. It is also called as qualified monism or qualified monotheism. That is, there is one God, supreme God, and but he is not a prisoner of his soulness. He is capable of manifesting the world. भगवान एक ही है वो जिसको गीता में कहा वासुदेव सर्वमिति कि वासुदेव ही सब कुछ बना है मतलब ये जो भी कुछ बना है सृष्टि है ये वासुदेव है so that is so this is the evolution of so he is referring to this we won't go into detail just general the pure monism although it sees in one unchanging pure eternal self monism is basically the philosophy of Shankaracharya. He subscribes but not fully. None of these exhaust him. He spills outside. See, as far as the ancient interpretations are concerned, he is the closest to Ramanujacharya, Vishishtadvait. That is to say, God is one, but it's a special kind of oneness. Shankaracharya ji's definition of oneness is soulness, SOLE, means कि उसके अंदर कुछ है ही नहीं इसलिए एक. What Ramanujacharya believes is what the Gita says, that he is one but capable of manifesting diversity and multiplicity out of himself. But even there, Sri Aurobindo he is closest to Ramanujacharya, but he goes beyond it. Ramanujacharya does not believe in evolution. He does not believe that this manifestation is moving towards a goal. Pure eternal self, the foundation of all cosmic existence, nor via Mayavad, although it speaks of the Maya of the three modes of Prakriti omnipresent in the created world, nor is it qualified monism, although it places in the one his eternal supreme Prakriti manifested in the form of the Jiva. This is the Gita's view also, and he says it, Jiva Bhuta, and lays more stress on dwelling in God rather than dissolution as the supreme. And then he lists other also, Sankhya, Vaishnav theism, then the Tantras, etc. But then come to this. There is this phrase, this Lord of beings who is the master of the universe and the friend of all creatures. He is the Swami and the Suhrid. Suhrid means friend. See, this is also common with Islam. Islam believes that God created this world and He likes this world and He loves the creatures He created, especially the human beings. He loves them. But that love in Islam extends only to Muslims, not to non-Muslims. But the fact is that Allah loves His creatures. That वो ईशा उपनिषद का भी पहला श्लोक यही है Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagat. This place is worthy of the Lord coming down and living in it. And then the tantras, etc. He is the master of the universe and the friend. So he is the Swami and the Suhrid friend. Like the and then he now come to this. Its aim, the aim of the Gita is the opposite to that of the polemist commentator. Who is a polemist? A polemist is a person argumentative who either presents his own point of view very aggressively and says I am right and the others are wrong and wants to demolish them, the others, or that is the point, or he begins by demolishing the others to establish his own supreme. So basically, you can say a polemist is someone who argues his case very aggressively, not in a dispassionate, calm, quiet, becomes almost fanatical. Opposite to the who found this scripture established as one of the three highest Vedantic authorities and attempted to turn it into a weapon of offense and defense against other schools and systems. In other words, some people say that our interpretation of the Gita is the right one, the others are wrong. And see, this of course is a mastery of Sri Aurobindo's power of expression. The Gita is not a weapon for dialectical warfare. Dialectical is based on reason and argument. The Gita is not a weapon for dialectical warfare. It is a gate, see, beautiful. It is a gate opening on the whole world of spiritual truth and experience. And the view it gives us embraces all the provinces of that supreme region. It maps out, the great writer, it maps out, but it does not cut up or build walls or hedges to confine our vision. The Gita starts from this Vedantic synthesis and upon the basis of its essential ideas builds another harmony of the three great means and powers love, knowledge, and works through which the soul of man can directly approach and cast itself into the eternal. There is yet another, the Tantric, etc. And now we'll read the last paragraph. We of the coming day. Found it? The last paragraph. We of the coming day stand at the head of a new age of development, which must lead to such a new and larger synthesis like that of the Gita. We are not called upon to be orthodox Vedantists of any of the three schools. The main three schools are Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and Shankaracharya. Now, the three schools or tantrics or to adhere to one of the theistic religions of the past or to entrench ourselves within the four corners of the teaching of the Gita. That would be to limit ourselves and to attempt to create our spiritual life out of the being, knowledge, and nature of others, of the men of the past, instead of building it out of our own being. Now see, this is a poetic sentence. We do not belong to the past dawns, but to the noons of the future. We do not belong to the past dawns, but to the noons of the future. A mass of new material is flowing into us. That is basically Vivekananda opened the gateway for India's spirituality to flow into the West also. We do not belong to it. A mass of new material is flowing into us. We have not only to assimilate the influences of the great theistic religions of India and of the world and a recovered sense of the meaning of Buddhism, but to take full account of the potent though limited revelations of modern knowledge and seeking, and beyond that, the remote and dateless past, which seemed to be dead, is returning upon us with an effulgence. Effulgence is glory. With an effulgence of many luminous secrets long lost to the consciousness of mankind, but now breaking out again from behind the veil. ये indirectly Sri Aurobindo is referring to himself in the sense that the Vedic knowledge in this, you see, the problem was the Vedas were compiled. You have to be familiar with the background of why how the Vedas came into existence. Sri Aurobindo's view is that the Vedic age was an age of great spiritual achievement. With the passage of time, that knowledge started fading. It started getting downgraded. So the Vedic rishis felt that if that knowledge was given to common people, then it would be misinterpreted and वो उल्टा सीधा मतलब निकाल लेंगे उससे. So according to Sri Aurobindo, it is under the threat of the Vedic knowledge becoming or of getting elapsed or becoming lost, that they compile the Vedas. So Veda compilation of the Vedas is a sort of last ditch attempt to preserve the heritage and legacy of the Vedic age. Is that clear? And that is why they they gave that knowledge through symbols, and that is why in the Vedas there is, and it got misinterpreted, and those symbols became the karma kand, that is a prescription of rites and ritual. ये चाहिए तो ये पूजा करो, ये चाहिए तो ये पूजा करो. But Sri Aurobindo has written a whole volume, The Secret of the Veda. There he has explained the real significance of those Vedic symbols. Cow, rain, Indra, Atris, all these Vedic gods, etc. What do they stand for? Indra, घी. What does घी stand for? वो कहते हैं ना घी डालो, जब पूजा करो घी डालो. This is only a symbol. What is the real significance? Ghee stands for purified intel घी इंग्लिश में उसका क्या डेफिनेशन? Clarified butter. Sri Aurobindo says the real symbol of ghee is purified intelligence. Use that to pour that to kindle your flame and separate the impurity. वो क्लैरिफाई, अगर जो घी डालोगे उसमें मिलावट होगी तो वो जो फ्लेम भी जो निकलेगी उस वो इट विल बी स्मोकी, उसमें धुआं कलौस होगी. He has explained all this in the secret of the Veda. So he is referring to this, that now the age that is coming, the secret lore which had been lost, जो लुप्त हो गया था, वो अब फिर रिवाइव होना शुरू हो गया. But he is not saying मैं कर रहा हूँ, he is referring to it indirectly. Am I clear? A mass of new material is flowing in, we have not, etc. Beyond that, the remote and dateless past, which seem to be dead, is returning upon us with an effulgence of many luminous secrets long lost to the consciousness of mankind, but now breaking out again from behind the veil. वो कहानियां हैं कि वो कोई वो गौएं चुरा के ले गया. All that has spiritual significance. It is symbolic. It is not just children's story. All this points to a new, a very rich, a very vast synthesis, a fresh and widely embracing harmonization of our gains is both an intellectual and a spiritual necessity of the future. But just as the past syntheses have taken those which preceded them for their starting point, so also must that of the future, to be on firm ground, proceed from the great bodies of realized spiritual thought and experience in the past have given. Among them, the Gita takes a most important place. If we have left out certain portions, if you read them on your own, he speaks of a synthesis achieved in the Vedic time, a synthesis achieved by the Upanishadic Rishi, the Vedic Rishi, and now he speaks of the Gita. See, this is the crucial paragraph. Our object then in studying the Gita will not be a scholastic or academical scrutiny of its point. It is not a tool for dialectical warfare, nor to place its philosophy in the history of metaphysical speculation. मतलब अगर कोई हिस्ट्री ऑफ फिलोसफी लिखे तो कहे पहले वेद आए फिर उपनिषद आए फिर पुराण फिर ये फिर वो फिर गीता भी आ गई. That is not the spirit in which we have to. In other words, it is not one more rung of a ladder or of a series, one more milestone, nor to place it in the history of metaphysics, nor shall we deal with it in the manner of the analytical dialectician, dialectical warfare. See, this is the crucial concluding sentence. We approach it for help and light, and our aim must be to distinguish its essential and living message, that in it on which humanity has to seize for its perfection and its highest spiritual welfare. This is the spirit in which we should approach the Gita. I'll reread this last sentence. We approach it for help and light, and we should not approach it with this spirit कि गीता इज द ग्रेटेस्ट और मैं जिस तरह से गीता को समझता हूँ वो ही राइट तरीका है. नॉट इन दैट स्पिरिट. वी अप्रोच इट फॉर हेल्प एंड लाइट, and our aim must be to distinguish its essential and living message, that in it on which humanity has to seize for its perfection and its highest spiritual welfare. Actually, I just want to mention Shri Aurobindo is what is called a system builder. There have been before him also, there have been great intellectuals who were system builders. See, I'm talking of two kinds of thinkers. One is who are system builders, and the others are who are great thinkers, intellectuals. One of them is Plato, Aristotle, and then later on there are many others. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, Hegel, to some extent even Karl Marx. See, who is a system builder? A system builder is something with which most of us would be familiar. Take, we have all studied Euclidean geometry as school students. Euclidean geometry is a system. A system is something, it's an edifice, it's a huge structure which you build on the foundations of certain basic principles. Am I clear? Now see, the foundations of Euclidean geometry are based on three or four very simple statements which are called axioms. So when we say that something is axiomatic, what do we mean? that it is self-evident. It does not need to be proved. अब देखो, what are the axioms on which Euclidean geometry is based? The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Why is it an axiom? Why is it an axiom? Because it is something so self-evident you cannot prove it. Can you prove that there can be a line which is not a straight line connecting 2 points but which is shorter than a straight line? A straight line by definition is the shortest distance. You cannot. Similarly, another axiom is two parallel lines never meet on the same plane. These are axioms. So basically, Sri Aurobindo is a system builder. वो सिस्टम की जो बेसिक है वो है वेदांत की द ग्रेट अटरेंसेस विच आर कॉल्ड द महावाक्यास ऑफ द वेदांत. The other word is Vyahriti. Vyahriti are sublime pronouncements. They are Mahamantras. वो वेदांतिक फिलॉसफी के क्या है? फर्स्ट, सोहम. Soham means I am that. In other words, there is something as that and there is something as I, and essentially the two are one. Essentially, but not outwardly in appearance. In other words, I am separate, the Supreme is separate. But we are still separate but one. Soham. That is one of the great Vedantic utterances. The other is Tattvamasi. You are also that. So there is that and there is you. So just as I am that, you are also that. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahman. Everything is the Brahman. इन तीन सिंपल सेंटेंसेस को लेके श्री अरबिंदो बिल्ड्स ए वेदांतिक फिलॉसफी. वो उनका सिस्टम है. वो सिस्टम ये है कि वो जो दैट है विच आई एम, यू आर एंड एवरीबडी एल्स इज दैट, वो दैट क्या है? व्हाट इज इट्स नेचर? इट इज ए सुप्रीम एग्जिस्टेंस, प्योर सच्चित आनंद, विच कैन ऑल्सो bring out of itself infinite possibilities. And this world is the outcome of that supreme existence exercising that power within itself of multiplication and diversification. So according to Sri Aurobindo, this is the real meaning of Maya. So what I want is that we should approach Sri Aurobindo with this point of view that, and so just as you have a tree trunk, पहले तो वो तना होता है सॉलिड, फिर उससे you have branches coming out. Similarly, Sri Aurobindo's tree trunk are two texts, Savitri and Life Divine. The rest, synthesis of yoga, ideal of human unity, human cycle, future poetry, essays on the Gita, all these are branches that move outward from that central trunk. So we should approach. He has written so many books, interpreted the Upanishads, interpreted the Gita, then he has written Foundations of Indian Culture, synthesis, Secret of the Veda, synthesis of yoga, etc. But all these are related branches shooting out from that central trunk. That is why it is a system. It is not just a series of random stray intellectual works. They all ultimately get tie together. They gel. So this is the approach we should have for Shivya. इज ए सिस्टम बिल्डर. और वो बेसिक सिस्टम ये है, उसका जो बेसिक विजन है वो ये है कि वो जो सुप्रीम रियलिटी है, इट वांटेड टू अंडरगो द एक्सपीरियंस ऑफ फर्स्ट फ्रैक्चरिंग इट्स यूनिटी and then rebuilding that unity. So that in and every so therefore this is a paradigm, this is a pattern which obtains everywhere कि पहले टूटो और फिर इकट्ठा दोबारा हो, and this is the basis of this creation also.